Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aurorin Expounded. A little bit off schedule, but after this episode we'll be right back on schedule going every other week once again. In this episode, I thought it'd be a good idea to go over all the different continents and countries that exist within the world of Aurorin, so you can get a brief overview of what the world is like as a whole. I figured the best way to do it would be to go continent by continent, and start up here in the northwestern corner, and then work our way clockwise around. That was really hard for me to kind of do it backwards. It took more takes than you'd think. So, without further ado, let's dive right into it. First off, we're going to talk about the continent of Aurorin. Aurorin is a mostly cold region consisting of two countries as well as the NAR region or Neutral Agreement region, which we'll go over in the very end of the video. The first country that we'll talk about is Aurorin, which does have a bit of mountain range, but most of it is flatlands with open plains that can get pretty warm during the day, yet pretty cold during the night. There is also a decent stretch of cold marshlands to keep your eye on as well. Aurorin is ruled over by a democratically voted council, and is probably one of the least developed countries I have had to this point because in the games I have run, none of my players have gone too close to it. To the north of Aurorin lies Truslid, a vast tundra landscape with a few mountain ranges as well, mostly cold, consisting of things like mammoths and saber-tooths, and also being home to a lot of giant and Goliath culture, as well as a lot of dwarven culture. In Truslid, there is also a lot of Underdark landscape, and it's where the majority of the Dwergar of the world of Aurorin call home. The deepest parts of the Underdark actually do extend all the way from Truslid, going under the ocean to Miskald here, so it is theoretically possible to walk between the two continents. However, it is highly advised against because nothing good is that deep. Up next is the continent of Phaos. The entire continent of Phaos is home to the Phaelandi Empire, a previously brutal regime that has since been overthrown by the previous emperor's son, who now rules with a much more benevolent force. The rebellion lasted many decades, and now the country is enjoying an era of peace as well as rebuilding after the carnage and horrible, horrible things that the previous emperor had inflicted upon its natives. This country is also where you're going to find the highest amount of high elf population. The landscape is mostly covered in lush forests as well as meadows and open plains. In its people, landscape, and political structure, it is probably the single most homogeneous of all the continents. Now on to a much bigger landmass. In the northeastern corner, we have the continent of Caranal, a vast landscape which serves as a massive melting pot of different cultures and peoples and races. The majority of the population is going to be human, which is quite honestly true for all the continents, as humans are just the most numerous race. However, this one seems to be a bit more of their focal point. So starting off, right behind my head here, we have the country of Atheus, which is where the Blood Money campaign, which I had mentioned in the last episode, is currently taking place. The political structure here in Atheus is kind of up in the air in the moment, as currently in the Blood Money campaign it is under tyranny, under siege by a crime family run by less than reputable things, I will say, without spoiling too much for you. The fate of Atheus as a whole is yet to be decided. However, it does consist of about 8 cities which all have their own lord or lady that rules over the city. Up here, we have a small area known as the Dolas State, which is a small independent thing that separated itself from the whole country of Atheus centuries ago. It previously had a really good relationship with the tyrannical emperor of the Phaelandi Empire, but after that emperor was overthrown, the kingdom fell on hard times, and their neglectful king was killed in an accident in the arena that he ran. Once again, the fate of these areas is yet to be decided, so I can't go into too much detail with it currently. Immediately to the east, we have the country of Irinsil, a lot of wide open plains with that lake to the northwestern border, as well as a few deep forests and a ring of mountains where a dwarven city is nestled within. Irinsil is also home to one of the most prestigious magical institutions known as the Crystal Tower Academy. It is also the birthplace of the discovery of magic for mortals, thousands and thousands of years ago by the first ever mortal wizard. This country takes deep pride in that historical knowledge as well as deep pride in their scholars and their magical accruity. And lastly, to the north, we have Tirvis, a massive, snowy, mountainous landscape that is basically if you took Russia and put it into a D&D world. You have relatively cold pine forests and plains on the southern area, escalating to near glacial levels of mountain ranges, as well as some underground volcano activity. A lot of Tirvis's culture revolves around worship. The military employs a lot of paladins and clerics, and is considered to be one of the more pious things. However, they're not super judgmental on who you choose to worship. They seem to accept a massive spectrum of gods of all three pantheons. And it is worth noting that both Irinsil and Tirvis are ruled by a democratically elected president. Next, we're going to move on over to Alishkar, right down here. Alishkar is where you're going to find the majority of the beast races in the world of Aurorin. So most of the beast folk will hail from this continent, at least historically speaking. It is worth noting that the majority of the world has had a lot of peacetime, which allowed a lot of the races and cultures to act as a melting pot in pretty much all these different societies. However, Alishkar is where most beast folk are going to find their original roots. This is where they were first created, where they first spawned from. So starting off, we have the Habdalian Federation, which is ruled over by a council, and the landscape is mostly dense jungle and ashen peaks of highlands. There's a lot of dangerous wildlife here, including a good amount of dinosaurs, if I'm being completely honest. And on this little island over here, it's really hard to point to, right there. That small landmass is home to a gate to the Feywild known as a Spring Gate, which leads to the spring area of the Feywild. But all the stuff with the Feywild we'll get into in another video. To the south, we have the Weskin Empire, ruled over by an emperor, of course. And this area is mostly made up of deep valleys and high peaks. And there is a good amount of volcanic activity here. It is very lush and very green, and it is home to a lot of the more avian races of the world of Aurorin, such as Owlin and Aarakocra. This country focuses on a lot of noble houses as well as certain dynasties and bloodlines, and they put a lot of import into their imports. The rich and abundant landscape allows for a lot of manufacturing and allows the country to stay profitable and wealthy, as it is able to produce a lot of raw material to ship to the rest of the world. And lastly, on this continent, we have the country of Dunathir, which is ruled over not by a single source, but each area and city is broken up into different territories, led by different, sometimes elected, sometimes tyrannical rulers. It is very similar to Rascalia in a lot of effects. Landscape-wise, it mostly consists of large, vast open deserts, as well as badlands and areas with canyons, but it does have a few spots that are more tropical in nature, mostly along the western coast. Dunathir also does seem to be a hot spot for buried cities and precursor ruins to pop up relatively frequently compared to the rest of the world. The next continent we'll be talking about will be Relendwell, which is the continent right behind me, and it is where the Paragon story is currently taking place. So first things first, let's talk about Alabas, because that is going to be the most familiar. Alabast is ruled over by a queen, and the landscape is mostly rocky, stone-like work with deep canyons, the world's biggest canyon, in fact, a large volcano, a desert comprised entirely of salt, which we have seen in the last few episodes, as well as some boiling marshlands to the deep south. A lot of the country takes pride in martial prowess as well as resilience. There is not a lot of agriculture going on in Alabast, but there is quite a bit of hunting and mining. And in terms of production as well as engineering, it is safe to say that Alabast is one of the leading industrial powerhouses in the world of Aurorin. Next up is Riscalia, which is a pretty diverse landscape. There are a few badlands and deserts, but also some deep swamps as well as carnivorous forests. There is no central government in Riscalia. It is mostly comprised of different territories that are ruled over by different warlords, and the culture there is very much survival of the fittest. However, there are a few cities and towns where it's basically a neutral zone. The peace is kept through mutually assured destruction should the peace be broken there. And on the northern tip of the continent, we have the country of Hirashal, which is home to green deep forests as well as massive redwoods. And the culture there is very druidic and in tune with nature for the most part. There is a little bit of piousness. There is a good amount of worship that takes place there. And it's where you can find most druid circles that operate in a large capacity. Obviously, you can find a little bit of everything everywhere, but in terms of en masse, large communities of druidic peoples, this is where you're most likely going to find them. And in the center of all three countries, we have what is the Blighted Lands, which is a landscape that has been corrupted by extra-dimensional entities and powers, turning it into this bizarre, unnatural place that most people don't go into, and the governments of Alabast and Hirashal work together to keep the spread of that corruption at bay. And the final continent we're going to talk about is Miscald. So first off, in Miscald, we have the country known as Duskenweald. Duskenweald seems to be almost in a perpetual state of eternal autumn, and the majority of what you'll find here is mostly drow, and the landscape is kind of doubled, as a lot of the surface area has Underdark directly underneath it, which is also inhabited by the residents of Duskenweald. Duskenweald is a very magic-focused society, and they do put a lot of stock in necromancy. There is a system that the government has in place to where if somebody dies, the state will pay you for their corpse. They will alter the corpse, make it unrecognizable, reanimate it, and have it join a labor force. Because of this, Duskenweald is considered one of the most productive countries in terms of manufacturing. However, it doesn't have a lot of the raw resources that the others have, so it's more of alchemical ingredients that end up being the main import. A lot of their culture does bleed over to the north to the Ashweave Empire, ruled over by an emperor, because they do have very good relations with one another. A lot of trade routes both on the surface and through the Underdark. Ashweave Empire is kind of a mountainous, pseudo-barren wasteland. It looks barren on the surface, however, it does have a lot of ash covering it due to many small volcanoes that do constantly erupt, which means the Underdark is actually typically safer as well as a more productive place for agriculture. These two countries have very good relations and trade with each other quite a bit. However, they are both usually at odds with the country to the west of them, Valdish. Valdish is also known as the Land of Reeds or the Land of Colors. They are probably the greatest appreciators of art and have the most respect for the dead within their culture. They see the creation of non-sentient undead as a form of slavery, forcing souls to do the bidding that they are not willing to do, as an undead creature that is not sentient cannot meaningfully consent to working. So because of that, Valdish is usually pretty tenuously strained politically with Dusk'n'Weald and the Ashweave Empire. In terms of sentient undead, they do feel a modicum of pity for them and usually will try to help them find a cure for whatever their condition is. But enough about that one specific aspect. The landscape of Valdish consists of, there's a lot of lush forests as well as a few mountain ranges, and they do have a lot of colorful plants like cherry blossoms. They have bamboo, and they do have a lot of wildlife that consists of things like tigers, pandas, things like that. If Tirvis is basically the Russia of Aurorin, this is kind of the Japan of Aurorin. They also have a high regard for people who master certain skills, whatever that skill may be, whether it be magic or swordsmanship, or even something as simple as being a seamster. And the culture dedicating oneself to a skill and mastering that is worthy of the highest degree of respect. And what you probably noticed through this is each continent has a little area labeled as a Nar region. So for Urvanus, it's Narvanus. For Miscald, it's Narskald, and so on and so forth. Well, these regions are called the Nar regions. It's an abbreviation for Neutral Agreement Region. These areas kind of work as safe havens during times of war, as well as international trading posts led over by a council which has a representative from each and every country. Basically, the Nar regions are an attempt at world peace. Think of it like a more effective version of the UN. This is also where a lot of the worldwide guilds make their home, such as the Explorers Guild, which we saw Vargas Heavyhands was a member of in the early episodes of the Paragon campaign. And the headquarters of the Neutral Agreement regions can be found in Nar Originus, southeast of Alishkar, along a string of tropical islands. And once again, these are ruled over by a council of representatives that are elected from every single country in the world to help determine political policies as well as things that could benefit the world as a whole. That's going to be it for a brief overview of the world of Aurorin. I hope you enjoyed, and each of these regions will definitely get videos in the future going into much more detail about their history, their culture, but this was just to kind of get you, the audience, up to speed of kind of what the world is like, both in terms of like political borders as well as just general landscape. Once again, just a very basic overview. And thank you all so much for watching. I know this video was off schedule, but I'm going to be uploading the next Aurorin Expounded video next week to get back on schedule, and then we're going to be going back to every other Thursday. And I plan to at least run one campaign in each of these countries, or bare minimum at least in each of the continents. And that's also why I haven't fully made the individual maps for each of these countries, because when I'm going to run a game in there, I kind of leave it a little bit vague, so when my players make their characters and introduce their backstories, they can have some influence of what shows up on the map, such as the town of Driftin in Ardavon's campaign. I didn't originally have that idea, but I put it on there to help Sean's character backstory. But that's enough for me. Before I sign off, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our patron, D-Fourtress. Thank you so much for supporting us at the Adventurer tier, and I'd like to reiterate that our Patreon benefits are now active and going, and you'll get cool things such as being able to play with either me or the cast members on Discord, just random games here and there, and you'll also get access to exclusive merch that we'll be making in the future, which will be further down the line. Thank you all so much for watching, and you all have a fantastic day. See you later. Bye-bye.